Call a professional here, right now, Alexander Hale roared, pressing his hand hard against the blood soaking through his shirt. The black housemaid standing quietly in the doorway did not move aside, did not lower her gaze, and did not call for anyone. Instead, she spoke in a calm voice that seemed almost out of place inside the charged air of the office. Sir, most of your men have already been bought. If you want to live, you need to stay quiet. And let me treat that wound. Alexander did not respond immediately. For a brief moment, he simply stared at her, as if his mind refused to process what he had just heard. A housemaid, correcting him, giving him instructions, inside his own home, inside the one room where no one questioned his authority. You, he said slowly, disbelief sharpening each syllable, must be out of your mind. His pale eyes narrowed, not only from pain, but from offense. He straightened despite the blood running beneath his fingers, drawing himself up with the instinctive authority of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. I don't know what you think you just heard, he continued, voice low and dangerous, but you are dangerously close to forgetting your place. Nina Brooks stood still, hands relaxed at her sides, her posture composed in a way that did not invite confrontation yet did not retreat from it either. She had learned long ago that the most effective authority rarely raised its voice. Behind Alexander, the tall windows reflected the fractured glow of Manhattan's skyline. The Hudson River stretched into the darkness like polished steel, indifferent to power struggles happening behind expensive glass. Alexander took one step forward and immediately felt the sharp protest of torn flesh beneath his ribs. The flash of pain hardened his expression even further. Call Dr. Mercer, he ordered again, slower now, each word deliberate. Immediately. No, Nina replied. The word seemed to strike him harder than the knife had. For a second, Alexander genuinely questioned whether blood loss had begun to affect his hearing. He had spent 2 decades building an empire that operated on precision and fear. His commands moved markets, ended careers, and occasionally ended lives. People did not say no to him. Certainly not staff. Certainly not a housemaid whose existence he barely acknowledged beyond quiet efficiency. His voice dropped into something colder. You are overstepping your position, he warned, each word controlled. Dangerous. I strongly advise you to reconsider your next sentence very carefully. Nina met his gaze directly. It was not defiance. It was certainty. With respect, sir, she said quietly, if we call the wrong person into this room, the man who stabbed you will know you survived before your bleeding stops. Outside the heavy wooden door, voices overlapped in growing urgency. Footsteps moved quickly across the marble hallway. Someone spoke into a radio. Another demanded access to security footage. Inside the office, the air thickened with tension. Alexander studied her more carefully now. For the first time, he noticed details previously irrelevant to him. Her stillness. Her breathing steady despite the situation. Her eyes observant, but not afraid. Invisible people often survived by appearing smaller than they truly were. You seem very confident, he said. I'm experienced, Nina answered. A knock sounded at the door. Mr. Hale? A voice called from the hallway. Nina spoke before Alexander could respond. He's conscious. He needs privacy. Her tone was calm enough to slow panic without inviting questions. Alexander's jaw tightened. You are issuing instructions in my home now? He asked. No, sir, she said gently. I am trying to keep you alive inside it. That answer lingered in the silence between them. He searched her expression for arrogance and found none. Only focus. And something else. Responsibility. He noticed then that she had already taken in the details of the room. The angle of his posture, the placement of the desk, the blood on the marble floor. She moved toward the sideboard without asking permission and took a folded linen cloth, placing it firmly into his hand. Apply pressure here, she instructed, guiding his grip slightly lower toward the wound. He allowed it, more from instinct than trust. Pain had a way of clarifying priorities. You will explain yourself, he said, watching her closely. I will, she answered calmly. But first we slow the bleeding. She moved to a cabinet built discreetly into the wall beside the wet bar and opened it, revealing a compact emergency medical kit among crystal glasses and rare bourbon. Wealthy men prepared for disasters quietly. She removed gauze, antiseptic wipes, surgical tape. Alexander's eyes followed each movement. "You are aware," he said carefully, "that if you are wrong about what you just claimed, you are placing yourself in serious danger." Nina did not look up from the medical supplies. "I am aware." He studied her profile, the calm precision of her hands. "Then tell me," he said, voice low, "why you believe you know better than my own security team." She turned toward him then, meeting his gaze directly. "Because loyal men break doors down when their employer is bleeding," she said softly. "They don't wait in hallways asking permission." That observation struck closer to truth than Alexander liked. He said nothing. She continued. "The entry angle of the wound suggests the attacker knew where to stand to avoid the cameras on the west corridor," she said. "He also knew tonight's meeting schedule." Alexander's breathing slowed. The implications formed quickly in a mind trained for risk. "You are making very serious accusations," he said. "I am making clinical observations," Nina replied. She slipped on nitrile gloves with quiet efficiency. "Before I worked here," she added, "I served as a combat nurse in the United States Army." The statement altered the atmosphere instantly. Not dramatic, but undeniable. Images passed briefly through her memory. Canvas tents, snapping in desert wind, helicopter blades vibrating through bone, young soldiers gripping her sleeve while promising they would stay awake. She remembered learning how to make decisions when hesitation meant death. A shoulder injury during her final deployment had ended her military career earlier than planned. Civilian life had required quieter skills, like invisibility. Alexander lowered himself slowly into the leather chair behind his desk, maintaining composure despite the strain. "You expect me to believe," he said, "that my life now depends on a housemaid with battlefield experience." Nina held his gaze steadily. "No, sir," she answered softly. "Your life depends on whether you can recognize when the person you overlooked may be the only one telling you the truth." Outside, the Hudson moved through the night, unconcerned with betrayal or power. Inside the office, Alexander Hale realized he no longer fully controlled the situation, and for the first time in many years, he chose silence. Alexander Hale had built his life on the belief that control was the only reliable form of protection. Control over money, control over people, control over outcomes. In his world, uncertainty was weakness, and weakness was an invitation for betrayal. Yet as he leaned back in the leather chair, feeling the persistent warmth of blood seeping beneath his palm, he understood with quiet clarity that control was an illusion thinner than the linen cloth now darkening in his grip. Nina Brooks worked with measured efficiency beside him, her movements precise but unhurried, the composure of someone trained to think clearly when others panicked. She cleaned the wound with careful pressure, her focus narrowed to the immediate problem of slowing the bleeding without triggering additional damage. The antiseptic stung sharply, and Alexander's jaw tightened, though he made no sound. Pain was not unfamiliar to him, but dependence was. The office lighting cast a muted amber tone across the room, softening the edges of expensive furniture that had witnessed countless negotiations, alliances, and quiet threats. Tonight, however, the office felt different. The room no longer belonged entirely to Alexander Hale. Authority had shifted subtly, not through force, but through necessity. "You will explain," Alexander said finally, his voice quieter than before, though still firm. "How a former combat nurse ends up working as a housemaid in my home." Nina did not look up immediately. She finished applying pressure, replaced the cloth with sterile gauze, and secured it temporarily with practiced speed. "Life rarely follows the plans we make in our 20s, she replied evenly. Outside the closed door, footsteps continued to pass. Someone spoke urgently into a phone. A distant voice asked whether the private physician had been contacted. Nina's earlier instruction had created hesitation in the hallway. Confusion slowed action. Confusion bought time. Alexander studied her profile, noticing the faint tension near her left shoulder as she reached for medical tape. A subtle limitation in movement, small enough most people would never see, but he had built an empire on noticing small things others ignored. "You were injured," he said. "Yes," Nina answered simply. She pressed the gauze firmly into place, her touch steady. "Training accident?" he asked. "Field evacuation gone wrong," she replied. "One of the transport vehicles rolled during a sandstorm. I kept working for 6 hours before the pain became impossible to ignore. By then, the damage was done." Her tone contained no bitterness, only fact. Alexander absorbed that information quietly. The idea of someone continuing to work through that level of injury registered with a kind of reluctant respect he did not voice. "And now," he said slowly, "you clean rooms. I maintain order," she corrected gently. That answer lingered between them. Order meant stability, routine, predictability. Things Alexander valued more than he publicly admitted. Nina disposed of the blood-soaked linen cloth in a discreet waste bag she had retrieved from the cabinet. Her movements demonstrated familiarity with emergency protocol, but also restraint. She did not ask unnecessary questions. She did not appear impressed by wealth or intimidated by authority. She simply worked. "You said my men have been bought," Alexander continued, watching her carefully. "That is not speculation one makes lightly." "No," she agreed. "What makes you so certain?" Nina hesitated briefly, not from doubt but from consideration. Words, once spoken in a room like this, had consequences beyond the immediate moment, because the attack itself was designed to avoid noise, she said. A professional assassin would not strike inside the residence without ensuring immediate fatal outcome. The wound is serious but not instantly lethal. That suggests the objective was not efficiency. It suggests timing. Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly. "Timing for what?" "For uncertainty," she said. "For internal instability. For power to shift quietly, while attention is focused on your recovery." He considered that. Ambition thrived in silence. Men who could not defeat him openly might attempt to weaken him gradually. "Continue," he said. "The attacker approached from your right side," Nina explained. "He knew exactly where you would be standing. He also knew which security camera creates a 6-second blind spot when rotating between the west corridor and the study entrance." Alexander's fingers tightened slightly over the gauze. Only a handful of people knew the camera rotations intimately. "Which means," he said carefully, "someone with access to my security protocols provided that information." "Yes, or someone studied the system long enough to exploit it. That takes time," she replied. "Time someone inside the house could provide." Alexander's expression hardened thoughtfully. Betrayal from outside enemies was expected. Betrayal from within required patience. Trust, once broken internally, rarely repaired cleanly. He leaned back slightly, controlling his breathing as Nina reinforced the dressing. "What do you suggest?" he asked. It was not a question he asked often. Nina met his gaze briefly before returning to her work. "For now, you remain injured," she said. "Publicly, visibly, you want me to appear weak. I want whoever arranged this to believe their plan is working." Alexander allowed a faint, humorless smile. "Deception as medicine. Survival often requires both," Nina replied. Silence settled again. The grandfather clock in the hallway marked the passing of another minute. Time moved differently when blood was involved. "You understand," Alexander said slowly, "that if you are mistaken, you have just involved yourself in matters far beyond your employment responsibilities." "I understand," she answered. "And yet you continue." "Yes." He studied her carefully. "Why?" The question carried genuine curiosity now. Nina paused briefly before answering. "Because leaving a wound untreated rarely improves the outcome." Her answer applied to more than the injury. Alexander noticed that. "Loyalty," he said, almost to himself, "is often claimed, but rarely demonstrated." Nina secured the final strip of tape. "Loyalty built on fear rarely survives pressure," she said quietly. "Loyalty built on respect tends to last longer." Alexander leaned back, absorbing the words without immediate reaction. Respect was not a currency frequently exchanged in his world. Power commanded obedience. Money secured cooperation. Fear discouraged betrayal. Respect required something else entirely. Outside the window, traffic moved steadily across distant bridges, each vehicle carrying strangers with ordinary concerns far removed from bloodstains and hidden enemies. Inside the office, Alexander Hale felt the unfamiliar experience of being dependent upon someone who had nothing obvious to gain from his survival. If this moment moved you, tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and what part of Alexander's realization about trust spoke to you most. Stories like this remind us that even the strongest people must sometimes rely on others, and that true loyalty cannot be bought. If you believe respect is stronger than fear, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join a community that values truth, courage, and quiet justice. Your support helps these stories reach more people who still believe integrity matters. You realize, he said finally, that if your assessment is correct, then the danger has only begun. Yes, Nina replied, and yet you have chosen not to walk away. Her expression remained calm. I left one dangerous profession already, she said. I prefer not to repeat mistakes. He considered that answer. What mistake was that? Believing danger only exists in places we expect it. That observation settled into the room with quiet weight. Alexander adjusted his posture slightly, testing the stability of the bandaging. The pain remained sharp, but controlled. You will remain available, he said. It was not phrased as a request. Nina nodded once. For the next few hours, she replied. You should avoid unnecessary movement. Internal bleeding is still possible. You intend to give me instructions for the foreseeable future. I intend to prevent complications. A faint trace of approval appeared in his expression. Very well, he said. Outside, Richard Cole's voice could be heard faintly through the hallway, speaking calmly to the security team, assuring them everything was under control. Nina's eyes shifted briefly toward the door. Alexander noticed. You suspect him, he said quietly. I suspect anyone who benefits from your weakness, she answered carefully. Alexander allowed himself a slow breath. Weakness invited ambition. Ambition invited betrayal. He had built his empire understanding this truth, but understanding did not make betrayal easier to accept. Then, he said quietly, we observe. Nina inclined her head slightly. Yes, sir. In the quiet that followed, the balance between them changed again, not dramatically, but permanently. For the first time since the attack, Alexander Hale felt something unfamiliar within the controlled structure of his world. Uncertainty. And beside that uncertainty, something equally unfamiliar. Trust, not yet earned fully, but no longer impossible. The silence inside the office deepened after Nina secured the bandage, not peaceful silence, but the kind that exists when two people understand something irreversible has already begun. Alexander Hale remained seated, one hand resting lightly over the gauze at his side, his breathing controlled with deliberate restraint. He had endured pain before, but physical pain rarely complicated his decisions. This situation demanded patience, and patience had never been the foundation of his success. Nina disposed of the used medical packaging carefully, sealing every trace of blood inside the lined container she had found beneath the cabinet. Small details mattered. The appearance of order often prevented questions that disorder invited. She moved with the calm rhythm of someone accustomed to working in confined spaces where every unnecessary movement wasted energy needed elsewhere. Outside the office door, voices continued to rise and fall in uneasy waves. Men trained to control situations disliked uncertainty, and uncertainty was spreading quickly through the house. Alexander's senior staff understood enough to know something serious had occurred, but not enough to understand the extent of the danger. Alexander's gaze followed Nina as she crossed the room toward the small sink behind the bar. She washed her hands thoroughly, her movements precise, her attention disciplined. There was no hesitation in her behavior, no attempt to impress him, no visible fear. Competence carried its own quiet authority. You said silence increases survival, Alexander said after a moment. Yes, Nina replied, drying her hands with a folded towel. You speak as though you have seen this type of situation before. I have seen variations, she answered. He studied her more closely. War? Yes. And after the war? Recovery, she said simply. He considered that answer. Recovery implied damage. Damage implied experience. Experience explained composure. The grandfather clock outside the office struck softly, the low tone carrying through the hallways with restrained dignity. Time was passing, and with it, opportunity for whoever had orchestrated the attack. Alexander rose slowly from the chair, testing his balance carefully. The pain remained sharp but contained. Nina watched closely but did not move to stop him unless necessary. She understood that men accustomed to command needed to feel control, even when wounded. You should not stand for long, she said calmly. I will decide how long I stand. he replied, though without hostility. She inclined her head slightly. Of course. He walked toward the window, each step deliberate. The city stretched before him, alive with distant lights and motion, unaware that a quiet struggle for power had begun inside a private estate overlooking the river. This house, he said slowly, is designed to prevent exactly this kind of vulnerability. Every system has a weakness, Nina replied, especially systems designed by human beings. He gave a faint, almost thoughtful nod. Behind them, the handle of the office door turned slightly before stopping. Someone tested the lock carefully, not forcefully. Respectful pressure. Richard Cole. Alexander recognized the subtlety immediately. Cole never forced entry when patience would serve better. Sir. Cole's voice came through the door. Steady, but concerned. We have contacted Dr. Mercer. He can arrive within 20 minutes. Nina's eyes shifted briefly toward Alexander. He noticed. I will inform you when I require the doctor. Alexander answered without raising his voice. A short pause followed. As you wish, Cole replied. Footsteps retreated. Nina observed Alexander carefully. He did not insist, she said quietly. He rarely insists, Alexander replied, because he usually does not need to. Alexander's expression darkened slightly at that observation. Cole had been with him nearly 8 years, long enough to understand internal operations, long enough to build influence, long enough to develop ambition. Explain something to me, Alexander said, turning from the window. Yes, sir. You said the attacker knew the timing of the West Corridor camera rotation. Yes. That information is limited to 4 people, and yet someone used it. He studied her expression. You are certain the wound was not intended to kill immediately? Yes. Why? She met his gaze evenly. Because a professional who wants you dead does not leave the blade at an angle that allows mobility. The attacker struck fast but not deep enough to ensure collapse within seconds. That suggests the objective was instability, not immediate removal. Alexander absorbed the analysis. Instability created opportunity. Opportunity invited challenge. Challenge revealed hidden enemies. And you believe my vulnerability is being measured, he said. Yes. Measured for what purpose? To see who moves first. Alexander considered that. Power vacuums rarely remained empty for long. Someone would attempt to step forward. Ambition often revealed itself quickly when hierarchy weakened. You are suggesting, he said slowly, that the attack itself was only the beginning. Yes, and that those responsible are observing what happens next. Yes. He allowed a slow breath. Patience had built his empire as much as aggression. Patience allowed enemies to reveal themselves. Patience allowed patterns to form. What would you recommend next? He asked. Nina paused before answering. Continue normal routine, she said. Appear stable, but not fully recovered. Allow communication channels to remain active. Those expecting change will begin adjusting behavior. You want them to expose themselves? Yes. Alexander's gaze sharpened slightly. You speak as though you have participated in operational planning. I assisted medical teams attached to intelligence units, she said carefully. Observation often determines survival before action begins. He gave a faint nod. Information preceded power. Always. Outside, muted conversation continued in the hallway. Staff attempted to maintain normal rhythm, but tension altered the cadence of footsteps. Uncertainty moved through the house like an invisible draft. Alexander returned slowly to the chair, conserving energy. You understand, he said quietly, that involving yourself in this matter places you at risk. Yes, you could request reassignment from the estate. Yes, you could leave before sunrise. Yes, and yet you remain. Nina folded the medical gloves into the sealed bag before answering. I once worked in environments where leaving someone untreated meant they would not survive the night, she said. Habits developed in those conditions tend to remain. Alexander watched her carefully. That is not the answer I expected. It is the honest one. He allowed silence to settle again. Trust was not built through declarations. It emerged slowly through consistent action. Very well, he said finally. We proceed carefully. Nina inclined her head. Yes, sir. He studied her for another moment. Miss Brooks. Yes. You will inform me immediately if you notice any irregular behavior among the staff. I already have, she replied. Something almost resembling approval crossed his expression. Outside the tall windows, the Hudson River reflected the first subtle hint of shifting night clouds. Inside the office, two individuals from vastly different worlds now shared the same objective. Survival first, truth second, justice, perhaps, later. And in the quiet space between power and anonymity, the invisible woman had begun altering the course of events. Neither of them fully understood yet. The office remained dim except for the warm pool of light cast by a single brass desk lamp. Shadows stretched across the polished floor where the earlier drops of blood had already been cleaned, leaving no visible trace of violence. Nina had insisted on that. Disorder invited curiosity, and curiosity was a risk neither of them could afford. Alexander Hale sat angled slightly back in the leather chair, one arm resting lightly against the desk, as he allowed his body to adjust to the dull, persistent pain beneath the bandage. He had experienced injuries before, but rarely within the walls of his own residence. The familiarity of the room only emphasized how unusual this moment truly was. A fortress was not supposed to bleed. Nina stood near the window now, observing the grounds below with quiet attentiveness. The estate gardens were illuminated by subtle landscape lighting designed to suggest calm refinement. Stone pathways curved between carefully maintained hedges. A fountain near the east terrace produced a steady, measured sound that normally encouraged relaxation. Tonight, the scene felt staged, as though the appearance of normalcy were itself part of the strategy. They will be watching your behavior, Nina said without turning. Not only tonight, possibly for several days. Alexander followed her gaze toward the grounds. A security vehicle moved slowly along the outer drive, its headlights passing between trees like brief signals. They will expect reaction, he said. Yes. And if they do not see it, they will create another opportunity. He nodded once, appreciating the clarity of her assessment. Whoever had orchestrated the attack was not impulsive. The timing, the method, the location inside the house all suggested patience and planning. Patience required discipline. Discipline indicated intelligence. You believe they want to measure the response structure, Alexander said. Yes, Nina replied. Response speed reveals chain of authority. Alexander allowed a faint, thoughtful expression. Chain of authority was the backbone of any organization. Interrupt the chain, and loyalty began to fracture. He rose carefully from the chair, testing his stability again. The pain remained sharp but manageable. Nina observed without interfering, understanding that a man in his position required the ability to function visibly. You should walk slowly, she said calmly. I always walk slowly when necessary, he replied. The subtle humor in his voice surprised both of them. He moved toward a small cabinet near the far wall, retrieving a crystal glass before reconsidering and placing it back. Alcohol would thin the blood. Discipline required restraint. Nina noticed the decision but did not comment. Outside the office door, conversation had shifted from urgency to guarded calm. Staff were attempting to resume routine operations. Routine restored confidence. Confidence discouraged speculation. Alexander paused beside the desk, considering the next step carefully. If internal betrayal exists, he said, it must remain unaware that suspicion has begun. Yes, and if suspicion becomes visible prematurely, the responsible party will accelerate action. Yes, he nodded slightly, strategic patience again. He turned toward Nina. You will remain in the house tonight. It was phrased as a statement, not an order. I am scheduled to remain on evening duty, she replied. You will adjust your duties as necessary. She inclined her head. Yes, sir. He studied her expression, noticing no sign of discomfort in adapting to the situation. Her composure suggested experience with shifting responsibilities in high-risk environments. Have you maintained contact with former military colleagues? He asked. Occasionally, she answered carefully. You trust them? Yes. You believe they would speak honestly if asked about surveillance detection methods? She considered briefly. Yes. Alexander absorbed that information without further probing. Connections mattered. Networks mattered. Reliable information mattered most. The sound of quiet footsteps approached the office door again, more hesitant this time. A light knock followed. "Mr. Hale?" a female voice asked softly. "The kitchen has prepared broth. Would you like something sent up?" Alexander glanced briefly toward Nina. She gave a small, nearly imperceptible nod. Normal routine. "I will accept the broth," Alexander said evenly. "Leave it outside the door." "Yes, sir." The footsteps retreated. Alexander returned slowly to the chair. "Routine comforts create perception of stability," Nina said. "Yes. People expecting crisis watch for disruption of routine." He allowed a faint nod of agreement. Routine had preserved empires before. A few minutes later, the quiet sound of a tray being placed outside the office door confirmed the continuation of normal operations. Nina retrieved the tray, examining the contents carefully before bringing it inside. Clear broth, toasted bread, linen napkin. Nothing unusual, nothing overtly threatening. Still, she placed the tray carefully on the desk. "Small meals reduce stress on the body," she said. Alexander looked at the broth with mild skepticism but accepted the spoon. The act of eating felt strangely symbolic under the circumstances. Civilization persisted even in moments of danger. "You believe the attack was intended to create gradual destabilization," he said between measured spoonfuls. "Yes. And you believe further pressure will follow?" "Yes." He considered the implications carefully. Pressure revealed weaknesses. Weakness revealed ambition. Ambition revealed enemies. He placed the spoon down. "The greatest risk in organizations such as mine," he said slowly, "is not external competition. It is internal impatience." Nina nodded slightly. "Ambition rarely tolerates waiting indefinitely." "No." Silence settled again, not uncomfortable now, but purposeful. Alexander studied the faint tremor in the reflection of the river outside. "For years," he said quietly, "I believed loyalty could be maintained through structure." "Structure creates stability," Nina replied, "but not necessarily integrity." "No." He gave a faint exhale. "Integrity requires choice." "Yes, and choice cannot be purchased permanently." "No." The simplicity of the exchange carried more weight than lengthy speeches ever could. Nina checked the dressing once more, ensuring no additional bleeding had occurred. "You will need proper sutures within several hours," she said, "preferably in a controlled environment. You believe moving location is advisable?" "Yes. Too many variables exist within the house." "Yes." He considered the suggestion carefully. Movement introduced risk. Remaining introduced risk. All options required evaluation. "You will prepare the necessary materials," he said. "Yes, sir. I will determine appropriate location." "Yes, sir." Another pause. "Nina." "Yes." "You have demonstrated unusual judgment this evening." She did not respond immediately. "Experience sometimes compensates for lack of authority," she said finally. Alexander allowed the faintest trace of approval. Authority often followed competence. Outside the windows, the clouds had shifted, revealing a pale reflection of moonlight across the river's surface. Inside the office, an unexpected alliance had begun forming, not from trust freely given, but from necessity acknowledged. And necessity, Alexander knew, had reshaped many destinies before. Night settled fully over the Hale estate, bringing with it a quiet that felt rehearsed rather than natural. The staff continued their routines with disciplined calm, yet subtle changes in behavior revealed the underlying tension. Doors closed more softly than usual. Conversations ended quickly when footsteps approached. Even the security personnel, trained to maintain composure under pressure, displayed a heightened alertness that betrayed unease beneath professionalism. Nina moved through the corridor outside Alexander's office carrying an empty tray from the earlier broth. Her pace measured and unhurried. She understood the importance of continuity. Routine behavior provided camouflage. Disruption invited attention. Attention could prove fatal. The hallway lighting cast warm reflections along the polished wooden panels, illuminating framed photographs of philanthropic events and architectural awards that reinforced Alexander Hale's carefully curated public identity. To the outside world, he was a disciplined investor, a benefactor of urban renewal projects, a man whose name appeared beside scholarships and hospital wings. Inside these walls, another reputation quietly existed, one that did not require publicity to maintain influence. Nina entered the small service kitchen adjacent to the west corridor and rinsed the porcelain bowl before placing it carefully into the drying rack. The older cook, Margaret, glanced at her briefly over a pot of simmering chicken stock. "He'll be all right?" Margaret asked quietly. Margaret had worked in the house longer than most employees. Her presence carried the steady calm of someone who had seen powerful men rise and fall without surprise. She did not ask unnecessary questions. "For now," Nina replied. Margaret nodded slowly, as if confirming something she had long suspected. "Men in houses like this," Margaret said thoughtfully, "they often believe strength means never needing help." Nina allowed a faint, respectful smile. "Sometimes strength means recognizing when help arrives," she replied. Margaret returned her attention to the stove, the gentle aroma of thyme and slow-cooked vegetables filling the room with comforting familiarity. Small domestic details often grounded people during uncertain moments. The smell of real food, prepared with patience, reminded individuals that ordinary life still existed beyond power struggles. "You should eat something yourself," Margaret added. "I will later," Nina said. Margaret studied her for a brief second. "You remind me of my sister," she said. "Army nurse. Never stopped watching the exits in restaurants." Nina inclined her head slightly. "Some habits stay." Margaret gave a quiet hum of understanding and returned to stirring the pot. Nina left the kitchen and moved down the hallway toward the storage room where medical supplies had been kept discreetly organized for household emergencies. Wealth required preparation for unexpected events, though rarely for betrayal. She selected sterile sutures, antiseptic solution, compression bandaging, and a portable surgical kit designed for private physicians. Everything necessary to stabilize the wound until professional treatment could be arranged safely outside the house. As she returned toward the office, she noticed two junior security guards speaking in low voices near the base of the staircase. Their posture changed slightly when they saw her approaching, conversation ending abruptly. Invisible people noticed interruptions. One of the guards, Daniel, offered a polite nod. The other, younger and unfamiliar, avoided eye contact entirely. Avoidance suggested anxiety. Anxiety suggested awareness. Nina continued walking without pause, storing the observation for later. Inside the office, Alexander remained seated, reviewing information on a secure tablet. His expression revealed little, though subtle tension remained visible around his eyes. He had already begun analyzing communication logs, transaction alerts, and movement patterns among senior staff. Pain did not prevent calculation. "You were gone 12 minutes, he said without looking up. "Yes," Nina replied. "Did you observe anything unusual?" "Yes." That answer drew his attention immediately. "Explain." "One guard at the base of the staircase displayed signs of situational discomfort," she said calmly. "Avoided eye contact. Interrupted conversation prematurely. Possible stress indicator." Alexander considered the information. "Daniel?" he asked. "No. The younger one." Alexander nodded slowly. "Recent hire," he said. "Recommended by Cole." Nina registered that detail without reaction. Patterns formed gradually. "Suspicion does not equal confirmation," she said. "No," Alexander agreed. "But patterns deserve attention." He set the tablet aside carefully. "You have experience observing behavioral indicators." "Yes." "Military training?" "Yes." He studied her again. "You transitioned from battlefield triage to domestic service." "Yes." "That requires adjustment. It requires acceptance." He gave a faint nod. Acceptance often followed necessity. Nina placed the medical kit carefully on the desk and began preparing sterile instruments. "You will need stitches within the next few hours," she said. Alexander observed the equipment. "You are comfortable performing sutures?" "Yes." "Despite your injury, I adapt technique." He considered her shoulder movement again. Adaptation indicated persistence. Persistence often indicated character. "What made you choose this house?" he asked unexpectedly. Nina paused briefly before answering. "Stability," she said. "Privacy. Predictable routine. And you found it?" "Yes." "Until tonight?" "Yes." Alexander allowed a faint exhale. Predictable environments create complacency, he said. Sometimes, Nina replied, but sometimes they allow recovery. Yes, he watched her prepare the instruments with practiced calm. You did not leave after your injury, he observed. No, many would have changed direction entirely. Service does not disappear when uniform changes, she said quietly. Alexander studied her expression carefully. Service, not obedience, not employment. Service. The distinction mattered. Outside, distant thunder rolled faintly over the river, suggesting an approaching storm. Storms often revealed structural weaknesses. Do you believe loyalty can exist in environments built on fear? He asked. Nina considered the question carefully. Fear can produce obedience, she said, but obedience rarely survives opportunity. Alexander gave a slow nod. Opportunity had built his empire. Opportunity could also dismantle it. Respect, she added quietly, tends to produce longer alliances. He looked at her thoughtfully. You believe respect is possible in this house? Yes, that is an optimistic view. It is an informed one. Silence followed. Alexander leaned back slightly, testing his breathing again. Pain remained consistent but controlled. You will assist with sutures, he said. Yes. After midnight, we relocate temporarily. Yes. Location will remain confidential. Yes. He paused briefly. Nina. Yes. You have shown unusual discretion. She did not respond immediately. Discretion protects survival, she said finally. He allowed the faintest trace of approval. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the tall windows, each drop reflecting distant city lights like scattered signals across dark glass. Inside the office, the quiet alliance between power and invisibility continued to strengthen, shaped not by promises, but by shared understanding. And in environments where betrayal waited patiently, understanding often proved more valuable than authority. Rain strengthened outside the tall windows of the Hale estate, the steady rhythm of water against glass creating a muted backdrop that softened the tension within the office. The storm moved slowly across the Hudson, its distant thunder rolling like restrained warning rather than sudden threat. Inside, the quiet glow of the desk lamp illuminated the surgical instruments Nina had arranged with careful precision. Steel reflected amber light, each tool positioned according to habit formed in environments far less forgiving than this one. Alexander Hale remained seated, his posture controlled, conserving strength without appearing weakened. He understood the importance of perception. In his world, appearance often determined outcome before action even began. A man perceived as vulnerable invited opportunists. A man perceived as recovering discouraged premature aggression. Nina examined the wound once more, carefully removing the temporary compression dressing she had applied earlier. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped completely. Time was becoming a factor neither of them could ignore. You maintained adequate pressure, she said calmly. That helped. Alexander allowed a faint nod. I have been instructed before, he replied. Her expression did not change. Military environments create appreciation for clear instruction, she said. You assume I served. I observe posture, breathing discipline, tolerance for pain, she answered. Patterns reveal background. He considered that briefly. I attended officer training briefly in my early 20s, he admitted, before deciding other opportunities offered greater influence. Influence. The word carried weight. Nina cleaned the wound again, her movements steady, minimizing discomfort where possible. The antiseptic carried a faint medicinal scent that contrasted with the polished luxury surrounding them. Blood did not distinguish between environments. It behaved the same way in marble offices as it did in canvas field tents. You adapted quickly tonight, Alexander observed. Training reduces hesitation, she replied, yet you chose not to continue military career. Injury made certain roles impractical, she said. He noticed again the slight limitation in her shoulder movement as she reached for the suture needle. You could have transitioned into hospital work, he said. I considered it, and chose this instead. Yes, that is an unusual decision. Nina guided the needle carefully through the skin, her focus absolute. After extended exposure to trauma environments, she said quietly, many individuals seek quieter settings. Alexander studied her expression, noticing the absence of self-pity. War leaves echoes, she continued. Yes, he agreed. The first stitch closed the deepest portion of the wound. Her hands remained steady despite the subtle strain on her shoulder muscles. She adapted positioning efficiently, compensating through technique rather than force. You worked near combat zones, Alexander said. Yes. You observed leadership under pressure. Yes. And failure. Yes. The second stitch followed, precise and controlled. What distinguishes effective leadership in those conditions? He asked. Nina paused briefly before answering. Leaders who understand responsibility extends beyond authority, she said. He absorbed that quietly. Responsibility beyond authority. Many men in his world claimed authority. Fewer accepted responsibility. Rain intensified outside, tapping rhythmically against the glass like distant applause for an unseen performance. You mentioned intelligence units earlier, Alexander said carefully. Yes. You assisted with field triage attached to operational teams. Yes. That required discretion. Yes. And trust. Yes. Trust given carefully, he added. Trust observed before accepted. She corrected gently. He allowed the faintest trace of acknowledgement. Observation preceded trust. Always. Nina tied the third suture with careful tension, ensuring stability without restricting movement excessively. You learned to identify behavioral indicators in high-risk environments, he said. Yes. And you believe similar indicators apply here? Yes. He considered that. Ambition manifested similarly across environments. Human nature rarely changed as much as people believed. What caused your injury? He asked. Transport rollover during medical evacuation. She answered evenly. We were moving two wounded soldiers through low visibility conditions. The driver lost traction. You continued treatment afterward? Yes. How long? Approximately 6 hours. He studied her carefully. 6 hours with shoulder trauma. Yes. And you completed stabilization. Yes. That indicates unusual endurance. Training emphasizes completion of responsibility, she replied. He gave a faint nod. Completion of responsibility. A concept he respected. She finished the final stitch and secured the closure carefully before applying a fresh sterile dressing. You will experience stiffness for several days, she said. Movement should remain controlled. I will manage, he replied. I expect you will, she said calmly. Silence followed briefly. Thunder sounded again. Closer now. The storm settling fully over the river valley. Alexander adjusted slightly in the chair, testing the stability of the sutures. The pain remained sharp, but contained. You recommended relocation, he said. Yes. You believe remaining here increases exposure. Yes. Explain. Nina organized the instruments carefully before answering. Internal threats benefit from proximity, she said. Maintaining predictable location allows observation patterns to develop. You suggest disrupting observation. Yes. Temporary relocation introduces uncertainty. Yes. He considered the strategic value. Uncertainty destabilized planning. Destabilized planning revealed weaknesses. What location would you recommend? He asked. Somewhere familiar to you but unexpected to others, she replied. He allowed a thoughtful pause. I have several such locations, he said. I assumed so. He studied her expression again. You assume correctly often. I observe carefully, she replied. Another silence followed. Rain softened slightly, the steady rhythm easing into lighter taps against the glass. Nina, he said. Yes. You have shown consistent judgment tonight. She waited. That consistency suggests experience beyond medical training. Experience shapes awareness, she answered carefully. You do not ask unnecessary questions. No. You do not volunteer unnecessary information. No. You do not appear impressed by wealth. Wealth does not reduce bleeding, she said. A faint hint of approval appeared in his expression. No, he agreed. It does not. He rose slowly, testing his balance once more. The wound held stable. Preparation for relocation begins within the hour, he said. Yes, sir. You will accompany me, She inclined her head once. Yes, sir. Outside the office, the storm continued moving east, carrying its quiet energy across the sleeping city. Inside, an unusual partnership continued to form, not from familiarity, but from necessity and mutual recognition of competence. And in environments where survival depended on reading truth beneath appearance, competence often became the most valuable currency of all. By the time preparations for relocation began, the storm had settled into a steady rhythm that blurred the distant city lights into wavering reflections across the Hudson. The Hale estate appeared calm from the outside, its illuminated windows offering no hint that internal calculations were unfolding behind polished glass. Inside the private office, however, every decision now carried weight beyond immediate survival. Alexander Hale stood near the tall window, one hand resting lightly against the cool surface as he considered the logistics of departure. He had built his reputation on anticipating risk, yet betrayal from within always complicated strategy. External enemies could be confronted directly. Internal threats required patience, restraint, and the discipline to wait until ambition revealed itself fully. Nina finished sterilizing the last instrument and sealed the medical kit, ensuring nothing had been left exposed that might invite unnecessary questions later. Her movements remained economical, her attention alert to subtle sounds in the hallway beyond the office door. You should move carefully for the next several hours, she said. Excess strain may reopen the sutures. I have endured worse, Alexander replied. I do not doubt that, she said calmly. But unnecessary risk rarely improves outcomes. He glanced at her briefly, acknowledging the practicality of the statement without comment. Outside the office, the muted sound of controlled footsteps approached again. Not hurried this time. Deliberate. Confident. A soft knock followed. Mr. Hale? Richard Cole's voice carried through the door, composed and measured. May I come in? Alexander and Nina exchanged the briefest glance. Enter, Alexander said evenly. Cole opened the door with careful restraint, stepping inside with the respectful composure expected of a trusted senior lieutenant. He was a man in his mid-50s, silver beginning to edge the sides of his dark hair, his posture upright with the confidence of someone accustomed to responsibility. His tailored suit showed no sign of urgency, yet the faint tension in his jaw suggested awareness of the seriousness of the situation. His eyes moved first to Alexander's face, assessing color, posture, awareness, then briefly to Nina, then back again. I am relieved to see you standing, Cole said. I remain capable, Alexander replied. Cole allowed a small nod. We have secured the perimeter, he continued. All external access points remain under observation. I have increased patrol frequency and restricted non-essential staff movement. Alexander studied him carefully. And the physician? Still available, Cole said. We delayed confirmation until receiving your instruction. Alexander allowed a short pause. I will not require Dr. Mercer this evening. Cole's brow tightened almost imperceptibly. Sir, with respect, an injury of this nature has been addressed, Alexander interrupted calmly. Cole's eyes shifted again toward Nina, lingering slightly longer this time. I see, Cole said slowly. He did not question further. Experienced men understood when questions would not produce useful answers. You will inform the staff that tonight's meeting has been postponed, Alexander said. Of course, and all financial transfers scheduled for tomorrow morning will proceed without modification. Cole nodded. Continuity projects confidence, he said. Yes. A subtle flicker of acknowledgement passed between them. Cole had always understood the value of appearances. I will review the security footage personally, Cole added. We should determine how this breach occurred. Alexander held his gaze steadily. You will provide me the footage first. Of course, Cole replied smoothly. The exchange was polite, measured, carefully neutral. Nina observed silently from her position near the desk, noting the micro-expressions that passed too quickly for most observers to register. Cole's breathing remained steady, but a slight tightening near his left eye suggested controlled tension. Only a small circle knew of tonight's meeting, Cole said thoughtfully. We should examine communications carefully. We will, Alexander agreed. Cole inclined his head respectfully. If you require anything further, I remain available. I am aware, Alexander said. Cole hesitated only briefly before turning toward the door. Mr. Hale, he added quietly. It is fortunate the injury was not more severe. Alexander's expression remained unchanged. Fortune favors preparation, he replied. Cole allowed a faint nod and exited, closing the door gently behind him. Silence returned once more. Nina waited several seconds before speaking. He maintained controlled breathing throughout the conversation. She said quietly, "Yes," Alexander replied. However, tension indicators increased when medical care was mentioned. I noticed. He did not ask how the wound was treated. No. He assumed explanation unnecessary. Yes. Alexander walked slowly back toward the desk, considering the implications. Cole has served reliably for years, he said. Long-term proximity increases opportunity, Nina replied. He nodded slightly. Opportunity shaped loyalty. Loyalty shaped outcomes. Did you observe anything else? He asked. Yes, she said. He did not attempt to visually inspect the bandaging. Alexander considered that carefully. A loyal subordinate might demonstrate concern. An ambitious one might prefer distance from evidence. He avoided confirmation of recovery status. She continued. Yes, that suggests uncertainty benefits his position. Alexander allowed a faint exhale. Uncertainty created movement. Movement revealed intention. You believe he is testing variables, Alexander said. Yes. And waiting. Yes. He moved slowly toward a concealed panel built discreetly into the wall beside the bookshelf. A biometric lock activated beneath his touch, revealing a small, secure compartment containing a secondary communication device and a compact firearm. Nina observed without reaction. Prepared men survived longer. We depart within 30 minutes, Alexander said. Yes, sir. Vehicle selection will remain confidential. Yes, sir. You will bring only necessary supplies. Yes, sir. He paused briefly. Nina. Yes. You have demonstrated consistent awareness tonight. She inclined her head slightly. Observation improves survival probability, she replied. He allowed a faint trace of approval. Outside, the rain had begun to ease, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet stone and river wind. Inside the office, decisions continued forming in quiet layers, each choice narrowing the range of possible outcomes. Trust remained provisional. Danger remained present. But clarity had begun to replace uncertainty. And in environments where power shifted silently, clarity often proved more valuable than force. The rain had softened into a fine mist by the time Alexander Hale and Nina Brooks left the office through the concealed corridor that connected the private study to the lower garage level. The estate had been designed decades earlier by an architect who understood that men with power often preferred contingency plans built into the walls themselves. Quiet exits preserved options. Options preserved control. Alexander moved carefully but with steady determination, his posture composed despite the stiffness that had begun settling into the muscles around the sutured wound. Nina walked half a step behind him, carrying the compact medical case and observing every intersection of hallway shadows with measured awareness. Her pace matched his without hesitation, her presence unobtrusive but constant. The concealed corridor opened into a private elevator rarely used by household staff. The interior lighting cast a muted glow over polished steel panels that reflected their silhouettes without distortion. Alexander entered first, placing his hand briefly against the biometric sensor that activated the descent. Neither spoke during the quiet movement downward. The elevator opened into the underground garage where a small selection of vehicles rested in careful alignment, each maintained for reliability rather than display. Alexander had long understood that conspicuous transportation attracted unnecessary memory. Subtlety provided longer protection. A dark gray sedan stood apart from the others, unmarked, understated, engineered for performance without attention. Nina noticed the absence of security personnel in the immediate vicinity. You limited staff awareness, she said quietly. Yes. Fewer witnesses reduce information flow. Yes. He opened the passenger door for her without comment, a gesture of efficiency rather than formality. Once inside, he moved around the vehicle with controlled motion and settled behind the wheel. You will provide navigation instructions, he said. Yes, sir. The engine started smoothly, its sound muted within the reinforced structure of the garage. The vehicle moved forward with restrained acceleration, exiting through a secondary access gate that opened briefly before closing again behind them. Outside, the night air carried the lingering scent of rain and distant river wind. Streetlights reflected softly across wet pavement, creating long bands of light that stretched ahead of them like quiet signals guiding the path forward. Alexander drove without haste, maintaining consistent speed, avoiding sudden movements that might draw attention. His discipline extended beyond business into every environment he entered. Control was maintained through consistency. Nina monitored the side mirrors occasionally, her gaze subtle but attentive. "You anticipate surveillance," he said. "Yes. You believe the attack required coordination." "Yes. Coordination leaves traces." "Yes." He allowed a faint nod. Patterns revealed themselves when observed carefully. They crossed the river through a route chosen not for speed but for unpredictability. Traffic remained light at this hour, the city shifting into its quieter rhythm as office towers darkened and residential windows glowed softly with late-night routine. "You selected this location previously," Nina said as the skyline changed perspective. "Yes." "A contingency site." "Yes." He turned onto a narrow street lined with older brick buildings converted into discreet residential units decades earlier. Wealth often preferred anonymity when circumstances required flexibility. The vehicle entered a private underground entrance concealed behind an unmarked security gate. The structure appeared ordinary from the outside, yet its reinforced design suggested preparation for privacy rather than visibility. Once inside, Alexander parked in a reserved space and remained still for a moment, allowing the physical exertion of the drive to settle before exiting the vehicle. Nina observed the subtle tightening near his shoulder as he opened the door. "Pain level?" she asked quietly. "Manageable," he replied. Inside the building, the hallway lighting remained minimal, sufficient for navigation without drawing unnecessary attention. Alexander unlocked the private apartment with a coded entry sequence known only to him. The interior space reflected restraint rather than luxury. Neutral tones, functional furniture, a small kitchen, and a modest sitting area suggested the location had been designed for temporary use rather than display. Nina placed the medical kit on the small dining table and began preparing fresh antiseptic solution to examine the sutures again. Alexander removed his jacket slowly, allowing careful movement to avoid strain on the wound. "This location has remained unused for several months," he said. "Limited exposure reduces association," Nina replied. "Yes." She examined the dressing carefully, confirming the sutures remained intact. "No signs of reopening," she said. "You should avoid unnecessary movement for the next several hours." He inclined his head slightly. "I intend to remain stationary." Nina prepared warm water and a sterile cloth. "You may experience fatigue shortly," she added. "Adrenaline often delays physical response to trauma." "I am aware," he said. She observed his complexion briefly. "You have maintained composure effectively." "Composure often determines outcome," he replied. She allowed a faint nod. "Sometimes outcome determines composure," she said. He considered that quietly. The apartment windows overlooked a quieter portion of the river, the distant glow of the city softened by mist rising from the water. The environment felt removed from the controlled intensity of the estate. Temporary distance created space for clearer thinking. "You have not asked about compensation," Alexander said. After a moment, "My responsibilities this evening are medical," Nina replied. "Your responsibilities exceeded employment description. Circumstances required adjustment." He studied her expression. "You display consistent discipline." "Habit," she said simply. He allowed a faint exhale. "In my experience," he said, "habit often reveals character more accurately than intention." She finished securing the dressing. "You will require rest," she said. "Physical stability supports decision quality. Rest remains secondary until variables are identified." He replied. "Yes," she said. "But exhaustion creates error." He gave a faint nod. Error invited risk. Risk invited consequence. Silence settled between them again, not uncomfortable, but purposeful. Outside the apartment windows, the river moved steadily through the night, unchanged by individual conflict. Inside, two individuals from entirely different worlds now shared a temporary refuge shaped not by trust alone, but by necessity and mutual recognition of competence. And as the hours moved quietly forward, both understood that survival had only begun the process. Truth still waited to be revealed. Dawn approached quietly over the river, the first pale suggestion of light dissolving the last traces of night mist into soft gray movement above the water. Inside the private apartment, the air carried the stillness that follows a storm, when everything feels briefly suspended between what has already happened and what must inevitably come next. Alexander Hale had not slept. He sat near the window, one hand resting lightly against the arm of the chair, the other holding a small porcelain cup of black coffee that had long since cooled. Fatigue traced faint lines beneath his eyes, though his posture remained disciplined, controlled, composed. Years of responsibility had trained him to function through exhaustion when necessary. Stillness allowed thought, and thought allowed strategy. Nina Brooks stood at the small kitchen counter preparing fresh bandaging materials, her movements quiet and efficient, maintaining the same calm rhythm she had carried since the first moment she entered his office hours earlier. The sterile scent of antiseptic blended faintly with the aroma of coffee, grounding the room in practical reality rather than lingering tension. "You should eat something," she said without turning. "I will," he replied, though he did not move. Morning light strengthened slowly, revealing the river in muted silver tones. Traffic began to increase along distant bridges, commuters unaware of the quiet recalibration occurring in a private apartment overlooking the water. Alexander placed the untouched coffee aside. "I reviewed communications logs remotely during the night," he said. Nina listened without interrupting. "Several minor financial adjustments were attempted shortly after the incident," he continued. "Nothing large enough to attract immediate attention. Small transfers. Testing responses. Testing reaction speed," Nina said. "Yes." He stood slowly, allowing his body to adjust before walking toward the table where she prepared fresh gauze. "Cole authorized one of those transfers," he said. Nina did not react outwardly. "Amount insignificant," he continued. "Purpose diagnostic. To determine whether oversight systems remained active," she said. "Yes." Alexander paused briefly. "He expected disruption," he added. "And hoped to exploit it," Nina replied. "Yes." Silence followed as she examined the wound again. The sutures remained stable, inflammation minimal, healing conditions acceptable under circumstances. "No signs of infection," she said. "Your body is responding well. I intend to continue doing so," he replied. She allowed a faint nod. "Healing required cooperation between discipline and biology. Cole will likely attempt further confirmation of your condition," Nina said. "Yes. You will allow partial visibility." "Yes." "Enough to encourage confidence." "Yes." Alexander studied her expression carefully. "You understand strategic patience." "I understand delayed danger often reveals deeper truth," she said. He allowed the faintest trace of approval. Truth rarely arrived loudly. More often, it appeared quietly when individuals believed themselves unobserved. Alexander retrieved a secure communication device from the inner pocket of his jacket. "I have arranged a controlled meeting," he said. "Location? Neutral office location, under legitimate business context." Nina inclined her head slightly. "Public enough to discourage overt action?" "Yes." "Private enough to observe behavior?" "Yes." Alexander placed the device on the table. "Cole will attend," he said. "And he will study you carefully," Nina replied. "Yes." "And you will study him?" "Yes." The exchange required no further elaboration. Outside, morning light continued to strengthen, revealing the subtle movement of early commuters beginning their routines. Ordinary lives unfolding according to predictable patterns. Inside the apartment, decisions continued shaping outcomes far beyond immediate circumstances. "You could have chosen not to involve yourself," Alexander said after a moment. "Yes," Nina replied. "You understood the potential consequences." "Yes." "And yet you acted." "Yes." He studied her expression carefully. "Why?" Nina considered briefly before answering. "Because ignoring danger does not remove it," she said. "It only delays its arrival." He gave a faint nod. "Delay often increased cost." "In your experience," he said, "does justice exist consistently?" She met his gaze evenly. "Justice rarely arrives perfectly," she said. "But consequences eventually reach those who create harm." Alexander allowed a thoughtful pause. In my world, he said quietly, justice is often negotiated. In every world, Nina replied, people eventually face the results of their decisions. Her tone contained neither judgment nor reassurance, only fact. Alexander moved slowly toward the window again, observing the river's steady movement beneath morning light. For many years, he said, I believed control was the strongest protection available. Control reduces uncertainty, she replied, but it does not eliminate it. No. He allowed a slow breath. Last night introduced variables I did not anticipate. Yes. And yet those variables may reveal weaknesses previously hidden. Yes. He turned slightly toward her. You have demonstrated loyalty without obligation. I demonstrated responsibility, she said. Responsibility without obligation often defines loyalty, he replied. She did not respond immediately. Outside, sunlight broke through the remaining cloud cover, illuminating the river with quiet brilliance that contrasted sharply with the tension of the previous night. Alexander picked up the communication device once more. Cole will be invited to observe stability, he said. And he will measure opportunity, Nina replied. Yes, we will allow him to believe uncertainty remains. Yes. Silence followed again. Strategic silence. Measured silence. Useful silence. You will continue working within the estate, Alexander said. Yes. Your role remains unchanged publicly. Yes. Privately, adjustments may be required. She inclined her head once. Yes. He studied her expression carefully. You understand that environments such as mine do not permit easy outcomes. I understand difficulty, she said, and yet you remain. Yes. He gave a faint nod. Then we proceed. Outside, the city had fully awakened, unaware of the quiet recalibration of power that had begun in the hours before sunrise. Inside the modest apartment overlooking the river, two individuals from vastly different paths had reached a shared understanding shaped not by sentiment, but by clarity. Betrayal had revealed weakness. Weakness had revealed truth. And truth, once seen clearly, rarely allowed the world to return to what it had been before. This story reminds us that true strength is not always found in power, wealth, or authority, but in the courage to recognize truth when it comes from unexpected places. Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who see most clearly, and the quiet voices we ignore may be the ones capable of saving us. Loyalty cannot be forced through fear, and respect cannot be purchased through influence. In life, as in leadership, real security is built on integrity, awareness, and the humility to accept help when it is offered. Justice may not always arrive loudly, but every decision we make shapes the future we must eventually face. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.